365 Radio. It's time for our weekly segment with Grayson Grundhoefer of SicEm365.com. Brought to you by Pioneer Steel and Pipe, where customer service is their main focus, and best in metal, steel, and pipe for large or small projects, with 2 locations in Waco and Bryan. Family owned and operated since 1943.
Boy, every one of you on the chat room got some great discussion going on, from coaching searches to West Virginia last night to the weekend games. It is fun that the games are going on and all the different stories in college football. Grayson Grundhoefer, SicEm365.com. Grayson, we are asked, you are one of those that does that asked us to predict games. Now, I'm not very good at it, but I did, and I think a lot of people on staff have predicted Iowa State to beat Baylor in Ames. And it seems like a pretty overwhelming amount. What are your thoughts about the game tomorrow in Ames?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of the perfect spot to see a lot of different opinions, because I think based on everything that we've seen and kind of everything that I've seen on this game, it's projected to be a really close game. And I think everyone who covers the sport looks at this and goes, okay, these are 2 really good defensive teams, but how good are they offensively? And I think that's something that we're going to probably find out of both of these teams tomorrow. And, I think the thing that also makes this really exciting is just how close these 2 teams have been over the past, 3 games they've played. Every game's been within a touchdown. Even when Baylor was terrible in 2020, that game was still a 7-point game. Charlie Brewer had an opportunity to go win that game as well, or at least tie it at the end. So every game's been really close. Both these teams are very good. I think, on the Baylor side of things, I think everyone's trying to figure out, is this passing attack going to turn a corner at some point this year? Are they going to be able to throw the ball downfield and create some explosive plays? And, they didn't have Ben Sims last game. They haven't had Monterey Baldwin for, part of the BYU game. And then, of course, last game as well. And those are 2 big-time pass catchers. So I think that both of them will likely be coming back soon. I think both should play, according to at least what Dave Aranda said earlier this week. If they do play, I think that'll help Baylor's passing attack. We know they're going to try to run the football. The problem is the team that they're playing in Iowa State is giving up 60 yards rushing per game. So they're going to try to take away Baylor's strength. And I think on the Baylor side of things defensively, Baylor's going to try to take away Iowa State's ability to run the football as well, while also creating some pressure and trying to create some turnovers, which have been hard to come by during the early part of the year for this Baylor defense. So lots of interesting, I think, styles going on. I think both these teams are going to play really physical, and I expect it to be a very, very close game, and we're going to get to know a lot about both of these teams after the game on Saturday.
Xavier Hutchinson versus the Baylor secondary is a matchup that makes me a little bit nervous, Grayson. How do you feel they're going to attack him?
Yeah, Paul, I actually, going into this game, I think that it's going to be more so about containing him than it's going to be stopping him. And I'm kind of doing that based off what we've seen so far this year. BYU had Chase Roberts. He went for 120 and a touchdown. Texas State had Ashton Hawkins. He went for over 100 yards and a touchdown. So you look at those 2 guys, they're not nearly as talented as Xavier Hutchinson. So, if I were to bet on it, I'd say he's probably going to have 100 yards and a touchdown on this Baylor defense, just based on kind of how things, have shaped up in the early part of the year. And that's okay. If he does get 100 yards and a touchdown, Baylor can still very much win this game. I'm not expecting Iowa State to only have, 100 yards of total offense. They're going to move it some. Baylor's going to move it some. And I think at the end of the day, you're going to give up some plays to Xavier Hutchinson, and that's okay, because I do think Baylor's going to try to take away the run game specifically. They're going to try to make Iowa State one-dimensional. And I also think, Iowa State, looking at the strength of the Baylor defense, they're probably going to say, okay, we need to spread the ball out a little bit, get guys in space, and probably throw the ball more than they have, just because the strength of Baylor's defense is, when you're trying to run the ball right at them, that's what Baylor wants them to do. And so, yeah, I think that he's going to get his. He's a very good player, one of the best receivers in the Big 12, might be the best receiver in the Big 12. We'll see. And, they got a quarterback that's going to give him every opportunity to make plays. But I also think they have a quarterback that's going to give Baylor quite a few opportunities to make plays as well.
Grayson, in hindsight, are you surprised they didn't try to land a wide receiver in the transfer portal, or did they try to land a wide receiver in the transfer portal and there just wasn't anybody, I guess, that fit?
Yeah, Craig, that's an interesting point, and one that I kind of thought about a little bit. And I think at the end of the day, the fact that, R.J. Sneed left to go to Colorado, and I think they probably kind of sat there and went, okay, so he's leaving, is there someone in the portal better than R.J. Sneed? And I just don't think they got one that was available to them. And I don't even think R.J. Sneed would have been a big part of their offense this year, but it's more so to say, they didn't even feel like he was going to be a big part of their offense. So if they were going to take a transfer, it needed to be someone that was going to be, a big part of the offense. And when you look at kind of the guys that went into the portal, a lot of those guys got picked up by big time programs. Alabama took a wide receiver transfer. Texas took Isaiah Nayor. He was a big time transfer. I think, those were kind of the, two guys that I remember kind of looking at the most. Outside of that, there just wasn't anyone that was a surefire, like, hey, we know he's going to be in our, top three. And if you can't find a guy like that, then you might as well allow your young guys to grow and develop.
Grayson, if Baylor had gone to Provo in a game that was absolutely bang, and I thought when in overtime, what was it, the second overtime, they were at the 5-yard line or whatever overtime it was, I thought they were going to win the game, despite everything, despite an offense that was sputtering. Had they won that game, would you think they would win an Ames, or would that matter?
Yeah, to me that doesn't really matter. And I know that there's this idea that, they lost early, so it was kind of a wake-up call.
No.
I don't buy that. I think they lost a really physical game in a game that they should have won. So maybe it's more so, we can't take, games for granted. Maybe you can go to that side of things, but it was so early in the year. This is the first Big 12 game for Baylor. If you can't get up for this game, if you can't get excited for this game, then you might as well not compete for another Big 12 championship. This is a huge game for them. You're going on the road. You're facing a team that, there's been a lot of stories written about Iowa State versus Baylor in recent years. A lot of people not necessarily trying to create drama, but there has been some drama and a little bit of fire in this matchup. And so, I think this is a game that Baylor wants to win very badly. And I truly don't think that, winning or losing that game against BYU has any repercussions on this game. But you never know. Maybe Baylor does play with a little more sense of urgency knowing that they've already lost the game. But again, I just think it's so early in the year that I think you're still kind of trying to figure out who exactly you are as a team. So I don't think they're quite at the phase yet where it's like, we lost this game, so now it's time to turn it on, which is what they did when they lost to TCU a year ago.
Abram Smith was the dude. He was the guy, no matter what Ebner brought to the table, which was a lot of things, that they knew that they could pound him 20, 25 times a game. How many game carries he got? Does Baylor have somebody in the roster with Tay McWilliams or not who can actually do that on this team?
Yeah, you see, my initial, thought is that is Tay McWilliams. I think Tay is that guy, and, not having him does make things a little bit tough. But I will say, last year you had Abram and you had Ebner. You had two veteran guys who, were very, very good and very powerful, and they went and got you, a yard, or Ebner made a big catch. And I think for this team, kind of look at what they've done. Richard Reese and Squirrel and Quaylen, they don't quite look like, Abram. They're not quite dragging people like Abram did. They're not running people over like Abram. Quaylen did against BYU, but in general, they're not really built like that. But I think Squirrel and Richard Reese specifically are two guys that can be absolute game changers at the running back position while Tay is out. And I get this sense that those two guys are going to be relied upon heavily in this game. Quaylen will as well, especially on pass blocking down. He's a better blocker, very physical guy. But I do think they're different, but I still think they can get the job done. And I think we saw that in the BYU game, especially with Squirrel. As the game got deeper and deeper, he just seemed to wear them down a little bit with his speed, and he's still pretty physical as well for a guy that's not that big. I know they got stopped, on that goal line drive there at the 5-yard line, but in general, it definitely felt like he was imposing his will on the BYU defense. And so I'm anxious to see if he and the offensive line, of course, are able to do that in Ames this weekend. That would be a good sign going forward.
If you needed a running back to squeeze through a keyhole, who would you want, Richard Reese or Squirrel Williams?
Yeah, it's a healthy Squirrel Williams. And, I know that Richard was unbelievable against Texas State. But here's the thing, Texas State's not very good at all. They're not a good football team. That's not going to be a bowl team. Whereas what we saw from Squirrel against BYU, that was another level because he wasn't getting amazing blocking. You know, there wasn't a ton of, free holes for him to run through. But you could tell he was moving people and he was running away from people. And I think Richard will get there, but I think Squirrel, the fact that he's been in the Baylor program for as long as he has, I think that it gives him an advantage as far as seeing the hole and hitting the hole very hard, which is something that Abram did amazingly well a year ago. I think I would still give the edge to Squirrel, but I'm telling you, Richard Reese, he continues to get better and better. He was a guy that we heard a lot about in fall camp as just a major riser, him and Quaylen. And we've seen that early in the year with Tay McWilliams out.
Grayson Grundhoefer, SicEm365 Radio, 365 Sports, Fridays with us at 3:45. Also the Bearcast that they record, he and Craig on Tuesdays, released later in the evening on 365, SicEm365.com. Grayson, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll see who is right.